All right. Thank you, Victor. And hello, everyone. Thank you for having me talk briefly about flow states. I will say, yes, it's not specific to STEM or STEAM, but it will make sense to all of you. Our founder, Ulf, helped to build some companies that you may know, such as Groupon and Siri and Postmates. So he has a long history in engineering. And the reason he founded Centered was to identify the pain points of engineers and to help them to not necessarily be more productive, but to use their time better when they were working so that they didn't get distracted by the myriad number of social media sites and different ways that we can get distracted. So while Centered has a task management and productivity element to it, the goal of the company is to help put people into flow states. And I'm the head of content marketing and community, and I wear a number of hats as you usually do if you work for a startup. We're a small team of 7 employees, and then I have 3 assistants. So 10 of us are on staff at the moment. But the main goal that I have is helping people to get into flow states and also educating people on flow states. So that's what I'm going to talk about. So let me share my screen and we can go a little bit more into what that entails. Can you see the PDF, Victor? Yep, good. Okay. So a flow state is characterized as a complete absorption in a task, which results in a total transformation of your sense of time. It's also referred to as being in the zone, for example. It's being so immersed in what you're doing at that moment that everything else fades away from you. And so, as the founder or the man who coined the term in 1975, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi says, the best moments in our lives are not the passive, receptive, relaxing times. The best moments usually occur if a person's body or mind is stretched to its limits in a voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult and worthwhile. Now, specifically, since you're all working in various aspects of code or creating programs or applications, you've probably had experiences where you got into some lines of code, you envisioned what you were going to do, and then you set to work on it. And maybe for an hour, 2 hours, 4 hours, you completely forgot about being hungry or thirsty, what time it was. That's a flow state. And flow, again, was coined by Csikszentmihalyi after interviewing hundreds of people from a variety of occupations about this unique mind state. And so he chose a metaphor related to water carrying a person along. Now, another way you can think about it is, I know this probably predates a lot of you, but Michael Jordan is still around. He actually just started NASCAR driving. So after pivoting to golf and baseball, now he's race car driving. But back when I was young, when I was your age, when he was at the peak of his career in the late 80s and 90s, he was very much about training to get into the zone. And flow states have a high feeling of attainable transcendence, right? You can see in this photo how he just is in complete control of what he's doing at that moment in a way that no other basketball player had been by that point in the game. And so high performance athletes and artists train to enter this state because that's one thing that Csikszentmihalyi realized. Sometimes you'll just get into a flow state without realizing it, but the more you practice getting into that state, the more you're able to get into it just overall. And usually, a flow state, they've done research neurologically on it, and it is identifiable through fMRI technology by scanning people's brains. And it generally takes 20 to 22 minutes of uninterrupted work to get into that state. So it doesn't happen quickly, but that immersion of being in an activity can get you there after a little while. And then, as I said, you can be there for hours. And it's not just for athletes. This is equally true of a poet and their poem, or an architect and a blueprint, or a group huddled around a whiteboard and the equation that they're working on. And again, of course, a team coding together during a hackathon makes a good comparison to what could help get you into flow. There is also something called group flow, where people working together on a task, their brains will actually sync so that they're in the same exact state at the same time. We've seen that in athletics, and again, we can see it in coding. As I said, Csikszentmihalyi noted that people more easily enter flow states when engaging in activities that they love. So if this woman here didn't like hiking, she probably wouldn't really have a good time during this activity. If you don't enjoy creating applications, it's probably unlikely that you'll enter flow because you don't have some sort of inner urge to do this. Now, a flow state produces an almost mystical experience, the sensations of weightlessness in a sense. Your sense of time is transformed. The difference between 5 minutes and 5 hours dissolves. And flow has been compared to trances and hypnosis. And because the flow state shuts down the part of your brain that creates your identity or your ego, you feel immersed in everything around you. You no longer feel a separation from your surroundings. You're completely engaged with what you're doing. And you feel at one with yourself and the world. So, people who are in flow report a sense of transcendence from everyday anxieties and concerns. And so they're completely able to focus on their goals and able to achieve them quicker and feel more satisfied after. And why I think this is so important at this point in our history and our evolution as a species is because multitasking has become the default mode that most people live throughout their day. The ability to focus on one thing at a time is an extremely valuable skill that not as many people have any longer. And that's why it really matters. And so your brain can process roughly 120 bits of information every second. And Csikszentmihalyi originally became interested in the complete absorption of painters while they're at work because they would go hours without eating or resting or going to the bathroom. And he realized that their full attention was focused on that painting, and that's what drew them in. And so, using fMRI machinery, researchers learned that flow is a subjective experience, meaning the same neurological patterns emerge in every subject who has been scanned. And so, as I mentioned, it shuts down that part of the prefrontal cortex associated with the ego. Researchers had originally thought that they would enhance that region. It would make you more fully aware of yourself, but the opposite occurs. Now, this brain region is also responsible for complex cognitive abilities, such as planning ahead, evaluating rewards in time, suppressing urges, making moral decisions, learning from experience, and having a sense of self. Now, another way you could think of flow is as the synchronization of attentional and reward networks in your brain. So that part of you that makes you focus, and then the chemical feeling you have inside your body when you are focused. And so again, a balance of challenge and skill is required. Besides a greater sense of focus, people that experience flow often overcome challenges in their life and are able to better achieve goals, which has the subsequent effect of making them feel more satisfied, making them feel more at home in their bodies. And people in this state also attribute it to helping them be more creative and feel more competent. Now, something we do a lot at Centered is focus on music. In fact, our application has over 60 hours of original flow music that we've had producers create for us. And we've been adding a few hours a month. We're about to start adding 8 hours a month. So, music is one of our main focuses to help people to focus. And music also promotes flow states. So, a number of years ago, Johns Hopkins neuroscientist Charles Lim used fMRI to examine the brains of improv jazz musicians and hip hop artists. And when the musicians improvise, their prefrontal cortex is deactivated, same as any other state of flow. And but some music is better than others for attaining flow states. So, for example, if you pick songs that are very meaningful to you, it's less likely that you'll get into flow. And the reason that is because you're associating a song with a memory. And so songs tend to take us back in time to think about moments that aren't right now. Music with lyrics isn't very good because there are two parts of your brain that process language. One of them is for understanding language, like you're listening to me right now, and the other one is for speaking. But if you're activating that part of your brain, you're not going to be able to enter flow. And you shouldn't listen to music you don't like because that will be distracting. And tempo also matters. So about 60 to 90 beats per minute is usually where people are most easily able to enter flow. Although I've played with house music, for example, at 120 beats per minute, and that also can get you into that state, provided the music is on the more mellow side, meaning it's not too aggressive. There's not a lot of synthesizers or things of that nature. So, Csikszentmihalyi identified 10 conditions that can help you to get into flow. And you don't have to meet all 10 of these conditions. He said 3 or 4 sometimes are enough, but it'll give you an idea of the ways in which you can attain this state. So, clear goals that are challenging but attainable. And this is, I think, very important because if you don't have the goal in mind, if you're just doing something, then it's hard to get into that state because there's no reward at the end of it. That satisfaction of completion is gone. And it has to be challenging. You're not going to get into a flow state by tying your shoelace. Things that you can do easily without much thought, your brain is probably going to focus on something else at that moment. So it has to challenge you, but it cannot challenge you to the point of being overwhelming. If you're taking on a coding project that you have no idea how to complete, then you're not going to get into flow because the stress is going to be too high. You need to be a little bit stressed by it, but enough to know that at the end of the journey, you can actually get where you want it to go. Strong concentration and focused attention. Again, if you're working on a project, every time you look over at your phone while you're working, you've just ruined the chance of getting into flow. And not only that, if you've built up 10 minutes of attentional work and then look at your phone, it's going to take 22 minutes of uninterrupted work to get back into that state. And that's been pretty consistent across all studies. So you need to really stay engaged and not be distracted by other things. Again, partaking in an activity that's intrinsically rewarding. So, for example, this weekend, you're probably working on a project that you envisioned with your team or yourself and you want to work on. That's different than going to a job that you really don't care about the end result. If you're just going to collect money and what you're creating doesn't mean anything to you, highly unlikely you're going to be engaged and get into flow. But if it's meaningful, you can get into that state. Feelings of serenity, a loss of self consciousness. Again, it is an actual physical feeling, even though I've been talking about brain states a lot. Your nervous system sends messages throughout the rest of your body and releases certain chemicals at different times. And flow states are your body feels very light, almost tingly. And you even at times you lose sense of your physical surroundings as if you weren't actually in a body at all. Sense of timelessness or a distorted sense of time. Again, you're so focused that you lose all sense and awareness of time. I remember watching a video recently about somebody who was, he loved gemstones. And he got so absorbed in looking at one rock that he started when he woke up, shortly after he woke up at dawn. And he became so engaged in looking at every nuance of this rock. When he came out of the state, the sun was actually going down. He had spent about 10 hours just looking at this one rock, thinking about the totality of what it was. Now, that's an extreme example of what a flow state is, but he was definitely in that state if you can spend 10 hours looking at one rock. Immediate feedback, and you can witness the consequences of your actions. Again, that's very important. If you just filed a bunch of code and you never got to see what you created, it's going to be very hard to gauge what you've done. That feedback is important to enter flow. Knowing the task is achievable and a balance between your skill level and the challenge presented, so that achievability is huge. A feeling of personal control over the situation and outcome. Again, any moment that you feel out of control or that you're not up to the task is going to release a number of stress hormones like norepinephrine and cortisol. And so that is not the right recipe for a flow state. a lack of awareness of physical needs. Again, you completely forget about having to eat or go to the bathroom or sleep. You're just fully locked in, and complete focus on the activity itself, which is effectively why I like to close with this, because that is the goal of what we try to accomplish at our company, but also we try to help people get to turning off all of the distractions and doing one thing at a time. And again, there's been a ton of research on this showing that when you monotask, not only do you get more tasks done in a day, they're usually better, you feel more effective, and you feel more satisfied. Switching from task to task to task is cognitively taxing. And so people might get a lot of work done in a day, but if they never had a chance to immerse in one activity, they never feel like they've gotten something accomplished. They always feel like there's something more left to do. Whereas if you can get into a state where you're completely focused for hours at a time, usually by the end, you feel as if you've put your full effort in. And I can think of nothing more important in terms of my life or just my job and what I do, the attention that I give to it, than feeling satisfied at the end of the day. So I hope that gave you some awareness of what a flow state is and how it operates and functions. And I'd love to answer any questions anyone might have.
Definitely. Yeah. Do you want to touch on what your company does or quickly just go overview that?
So we Centered is an application that you enter your tasks into. We integrate with a number of other applications like Google Calendar and Todoist and Asana. That way, we're not really designed to be a to-do list. People import the tasks into Centered. And then once they're there, you hit play. What pops up is called our mini player, and music will start playing. We have, as I said, over 60 hours of original music. And I've also created a number of Spotify playlists for Center.app that people can find just on Spotify, but they meet the conditions to get into flow, all instrumental, certain BPMs, certain genres. And then you start your task. And what happens is we have a voice coach, and he is a live human who's recorded a number of prompts for us. His name is Noah. And if you're working on something and then you go over and you check your mail, Noah will come on and ask you if you're still on task. And sometimes for people's workflow, like for example, I handle all the content and social media for the company as well. And so sometimes I actually should be on social media. It's part of what I'm doing. And there's a little button that says mark this app on task, and then Noah will leave you alone. But if you've just been distracted by something, the voice prompt will help to recognize that you should be focused on something else at that moment. And so hopefully you go back into that task, and then we have a pretty rich data set of analytics that every user has, where they get to see how long they were in flow time and how often they were distracted during their tasks. And what that does, and we launched in late July, and what we found with a lot of our power users, people who use us daily for a number of hours, is that they're able to get their work done about 30% faster, because knowing that Noah is paying attention to what they're doing on their computer, they can then remember that they're kind of being watched in that sense and stay focused on their task. And this week, actually, we're conducting an internal hackathon to create the mobile app that will tether to desktop and communicate, so that if you go to your phone while you're on your desktop, we'll also know that and will prompt you to get back into your flow.